We are allowed to increase the stakes after setting a 5,000-ounce target. Unbelievably, we are within striking distance of 7,000. Oh, what if the century's largest gold strike was concealed in a location that no one dared to visit? Parker Schnabel just staked his whole business on the Widow's Cut, a frozen mineshaft that fell and is said to contain a wealth. Parker and his team came up with a desperate high-tech scheme that led them to an unexplored gold vein worth $75 million, while his opponents dubbed him crazy. A Yukon death trap that protects a king's ransom is known as the Widow's Cut. The problem is that even the most courageous miners will not venture into some areas in the competitive Klondike gold mining industry. They become the subject of legends, tales of peril and failure that permeate the very fabric of the region. The Widow's Cut, a mineshaft so infamously hazardous and merciless that it was deemed off-limits in a self-harm expedition, was one such location. Strange as it may seem, the notion that this hole was too deep and unstable to approach was not merely superstitious. Bob has now lost it. Because everything is so far away, it's a major pain in the ass. First, there were reports that dense permafrost encircled and buried the wound. This isn't simply frozen earth, you see. For thousands of years this dirt has been frozen solid, as hard as concrete. On the days when you're constantly producing ice, you reach a point when the temperature never rises above freezing. Yes, precisely. There will undoubtedly be instances of pipes freezing and other such issues. With the persistent scary possibility of enormous multi-ton chunks of rock and frozen soil suddenly tumbling into any man-made aperture, any attempt to dig deeper, to excavate it, would be extremely dangerous. It goes even deeper, as if that weren't enough. Additionally, there was always the very real possibility of disastrous flooding. Any type of water intrusion, whether from subterranean springs or melting permafrost, might have immediately jeopardized the shaft wall's stability and, worse, flooded and destroyed heavy mining equipment valued at millions of dollars. It was a season with all of these potentially fatal elements at play. I might lower my defenses. Really, I have no idea. Permit me to spend a fortune. Parker and his whole crew had to come to terms with the fact that they would have to venture down into what was essentially a geological death trap if they ever wanted to obtain the fabled riches that was said to reside at the bottom of this mine. Given how difficult this task was, nobody, not even Gold Rush viewers, would have been shocked if Parker and his team had determined that this mine wasn't for them after just one glance at the Widow's Cut. It was undoubtedly not worth endangering their lives for the entire operation, even though the tales promised them a ton of gold to extract down there. The weird part comes next. That is not Parker Schnabel's way of thinking. It's almost as if Parker saw another obstacle to overcome, another mountain to climb, instead of the enormous danger. Perhaps more significantly, Parker viewed this as a challenge he would not back down from. No matter what, they would eventually find their way down that shaft. Winter has arrived in the Klondike goldfields, which are only 150 miles south of the Arctic Circle. Parker made the decision to fight back against an impossible task using intellect and sophisticated eyes in the sky rather than physical force. An action that would result in an incredible discovery. However, accepting a task does not make it any less difficult. What could then? Contemporary technologies. Impact boards in Roxanne's pre-wash are designed to deflect the force of large boulders before they strike the shaker deck. In reality, what's happening behind the scenes is that Parker and his team got access to a few covert weapons. They possessed the advanced equipment to examine the terrain in ways that the old-timers could only have imagined, in addition to their standard armament of excavators and sleeping plants. And they did precisely that. Gazing at the intimidating scenery, Parker may have said to one of his senior crew members, "I'm just coming to talk to you about this exact problem. I mean, there's a reason it's called permafrost, since it's frozen in place." It was a huge challenge, as mentioned by one of his teammates. "We would really benefit from at least 4 hours of temperatures over 35 degrees. Waiting for the weather to improve wasn't an option, but we need some warm weather." Thus the boys pulled out their cutting-edge LiDAR equipment. The revolutionary nature of this technology for miners is something that is rarely discussed. In order to produce an extraordinarily comprehensive three-dimensional map of the ground, LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, emits millions of laser pulses. Furthermore, they combined it with cutting-edge drone mapping methods. A lot of miners have been attempting and failing to make a breakthrough since the 1980s, So whomever came up with the combination of these instruments must be a genius. You see, the team's original objective was to dig a new shaft or ramp that would allow them to enter the mine in a completely different method. However, given the difficulties posed by permafrost and the possibility of floods, that might turn out to be too risky, expensive, and time-consuming. It becomes harmful very quickly. We'll do our best. Okay, see you. Okay, dude. We'll continue to pursue it. They certainly desired to obtain all of the gold that is located there, but at what price? Their valuable resources, fuel, wages, and time were being wasted on activities that didn't really entail mining a single ounce of gold the longer they searched for a way to get down there. They had to make sure they were successful with their gold mining endeavor at the Widow's Cut if they didn't want to end this crucial season with a devastating loss. They also needed to act quickly. The technology paid off here. When the LAR and drone data were combined, they showed something amazing that was concealed from view. A secret that had been forgotten for decades was exposed by the lasers as they pierced the ground and the undergrowth. A shaft that collapsed, a forgotten gold vein, and a secret route into the center of the wealth. Unexpectedly, the high-tech survey discovered a way to decline. They continue to search for gold. On the hill is Mike. He has a ton of pavement, huge traverse. The discovery was a collapsed vertical shaft that was entirely obscured by decades of dense, tangled overgrowth, and was a remnant of the original mining activity. The collapsed shaft was moreover 40 meters deep according to their exact measurements, but it had been lost to time. That's a straight drop of more than 130 feet. This collapsed hole may be their hidden entrance, a means of accessing the gold without resorting to a full-scale conflict with the surrounding permafrost, provided they undertake some extremely hazardous and difficult labor. Following a thorough analysis, the crew determined that stabilizing this collapsed shaft was their best and possibly only option. Although it was a terrible idea, they managed to construct a safe enough route to descend into the darkness into the center of the previously unreachable mine with the help of some sturdy reinforced steel beams and Parker's knowledgeable crew. Imagine how energized these miners must have been. They finally had a secure straight route down to the gold they had been dreaming of after weeks of despair and staring at an impossibly difficult predicament. 38.6 ounces, hardly $66,000 worth. And they discovered something amazing at the bottom. Their journey quickly led them to an unexplored gold vein rich in quartz that may provide a much-needed multi-million-dollar boost to their entire season. Parker's on-site geologist said the work was in the richest and cleanest natural deposit he had ever seen since the vein was that pure and immaculate. The team began working nearly furiously as soon as they had finished admiring the glistening gold vein they had discovered. They didn't want to spend too much time down there after all. They were aware that other miners in the cutthroat Klondike would hear rumors of this amazing discovery and attempt to jump their claim in order to obtain it for themselves. The team worked non-stop around the clock with that motivated attitude. It becomes really crazy at this point. This unrelenting endeavor turned out to be incredibly successful. After 3 days of relentless labor, they were able to extract nearly 4,000 ounces of gold from this extraordinarily rich vein in just a little more than 72 hours. For the team, this one breathtaking cleanup turned out to be a transformative, nearly life-altering experience. Once all that gold had been extracted, they calculated it was valued at around $10 million. For the majority of the season and beyond, that one haul lot should pay for all they need, including transportation and diesel. Given that this was only the beginning for Parker, his team, and this extraordinarily wealthy mine, this was fantastic for the team. Although it saved the season, the $10 million score was an even greater and more incredible treasure. Therefore, having 2 extra plants on the go would be good. 4 running at the end of the season was still lingering a bit deeper in the ground. It goes even deeper, as if that weren't enough. They discovered that the gold in the vein's geology was far larger and more extensive than they had first believed after closely examining it. Based on the vein's thickness and estimated length, the team quickly calculated that it actually stretched another 2 kilometers, or around 1¼ miles underground. The numbers really start to go crazy at this point. The team estimated that they could be able to extract an additional $75 million from this one gold vein after doing further calculations that took into consideration the vein's size and richness. It would be fantastic news for Parker and his crew if they could pull this off, if they could truly extract that much gold. This may indicate that the team would have not just a good season but the most successful season in Gold Rush history. It wouldn't be simple though, and they had a lot of work ahead of them. If they wanted to obtain all that gold, they would need to not only continue working tirelessly on this vein, but also fend off rivals who would rush in after learning of the unavoidable tales about this quartz-rich gold vein. The entire time you're establishing ice. Yes, precisely. There will undoubtedly be instances of pipes freezing and other such issues. Word spread quickly, almost too quickly. The whole Klondike appeared to know as soon as word got out about Parker's incredible gold strike. Excitement was in the air among other miners, workers, and even government inspectors. Everyone was eager to see it. Everyone was curious about what Parker had discovered. Parker, however, was prepared. He had already ensured that the claim was locked down and completely legitimate. He and he alone owned the land. Nobody else was receiving any of it. Never, ever. And with good cause. This might be the big discovery that made all the difference. Parker saw this as more than a stroke of luck. The kind of finding that makes all the difficult years worthwhile was this one. The big one. The sort of discovery that might dwarf his prior achievements. He had put a lot of money, effort, and the faith of his crew at risk, and now it appeared to be paying off handsomely at last. Everyone in the Yukon was observing. They weren't merely observing, they were conversing. Whispers began to fly. Was this the largest strike of gold in the 21st century? Had Parker simply changed the game's rules? And the questions were coming in quick succession. Would Parker gain even more influence in the mining industry as a result of this massive strike? Would envious crews attempt to enter covertly and seize a portion of the land? Would he be able to bear the strain of such a huge site? This was no longer just gold. This was a change in authority. This was the past. He just needs 174 to reach his season goal of 7,000. However, the money pit has the potential to yield much more, given its large gold payout. The burden on Parker's shoulders suddenly doubled. Pressure increased as wealth and attention increased. Now everyone was staring at him. Could he guide his group through this storm of high expectations, fame, and greed? Or would things begin to unravel? It was obvious. Parker's crew would not be the only ones impacted by this finding. Everything in the Klondike might change as a result. Prices may increase. The cost of land can increase. In an attempt to strike their own jackpot, more miners may relocate. It resembled tossing a rock into a lake that was motionless. The repercussions would be far-reaching. Parker, however, was not afraid. He was intent. He had been preparing for this moment for years, and he had no intention of letting it pass. He was aware of the hardships of Yukon survival. He had witnessed poor seasons. He had endured harsh terrain, extreme cold, and equipment failures. However, this was unique. This was an opportunity to become a legend. He simply got lucky, according to some. Some people think it was instinctual. But regardless of how it occurred, one thing is for sure. Parker Schnabel just left a lasting impression. And there's still more to the story. What follows? Will he maintain command of this enormous operation? Will his squad be able to handle the pressure? Or will it all become too much to handle? One thing is true regardless of what occurs. The world is listening to what the Klondike King has to say. Parker Schnabel turned a lethal trap into a legendary windfall with his $75 million wager. But has he just welcomed a new type of peril with a finding this significant?